Shalom, y'all. It's Beth Shulam. Welcome back to our Bible study series that links the Hebrew scriptures with the New Testament scriptures. And I'm Beth Shulam, and thanks again for tuning in. It's always a pleasure to be back. Today I'm going to look at Hebrews chapter 11, verses 22 and 23. And we are going to talk about something that most of us don't like to talk about. It's how we face the end of our life. And these two little verses in Hebrews give us a big picture, a snapshot of how two patriarchs handled life near the end. So we're going to look at Jacob, and we're going to look at Joseph, and see how that tiny scripture in Hebrews rolls back into two big chapters in Genesis. So here we go. I'm going to read Hebrews 11, 21 and 22, and I use what they call the Jewish annotated New Testament. That doesn't have anything to do with the version. I like to read from the New Revised Standard Version. So if you have a New Revised Standard Version Bible, then that's what you hear. The Jewish annotated New Testament just has articles and commentary from two scholars. And this is their particular New Testament. So here we go. Hebrews 11, verse 21. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave instructions about his burial. So we have Jacob and Joseph. They're both old. Close to dying, very close to dying here. And they're both gathering their people around them. This verse in Hebrews says, folks, look what faith looks like at the finish line. Of course, the Hebrews 11 chapter is usually called the Heroes of Faith. It lists so many different people from the Old Testament. And so it's like a laundry list of faithful people from the Hebrew scriptures. But particularly Jacob and Joseph are talked about as they are dying. So we're going to walk through where this comes from. Jacob, you'll see, crosses his hands. He's going to bless some people. Joseph is going to make requests of his people. So let's go back to Genesis. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 48. And when I read from the Tanakh, I like the Jewish Study Bible. And it is the Jewish Publication Society's translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. And it also has lots of interesting articles and commentary as well from leading scholars. I'm going to read a little bit of Genesis 48 for you so you can hear the story about Jacob's end. So here we go. Sometime afterwards, Joseph was told, your father, who is Jacob, is ill. So he took with him I need to start over. So here we go. Genesis chapter 48. Sometime afterward, Joseph was told, your father is ill. So he took with him his two sons. Oh, wait, let's back up. I am sorry. Let's back up. let's go back to 47 verses 28. My eyes skipped up and I was like, I need to read that part too. So chapter 27 verse 28. Jacob lived 17 years in the land of Egypt. So we see that they live in Egypt. So that the span of Jacob's life came to 147 years. And when the time approached for Israel to die, it's very interesting. They go back and forth with his name here. He summoned his son Joseph and said to him, do me this favor. Place your hand under my thigh as a pledge of your steadfast loyalty. Please do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, take me up from Egypt and bury me in the burial place. And Joseph replied, I will do as you've spoken. And he said, swear to me. And Joseph swore to him. And then Israel bowed at the head of the bed. And sometime afterward, Joseph was told, your father is ill. So he took with him his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And when Jacob was told, your son Joseph has come to see you, Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me and said to me, I will make you fertile and numerous, making you a community of peoples, and I will assign this land to your offspring to come for an everlasting possession. Now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, no less than Reuben and Simeon. So what he's doing here is he is bringing Joseph back into the family inheritance by telling him that your 2 sons belong to me. But progeny born to you after them shall be yours. They shall be recorded instead of their brothers in their inheritance. I do this because when I was returning from Padan, Rachel died to my sorrow while I was journeying in the land of Canaan. When still some distance short of Ephrath, I buried her there on the road to Ephrath, now Bethlehem. And then it says, Jacob noticed the 2 boys, and because he was dim with age, it says he couldn't see well, so Joseph brought them closer, and they embraced Jacob. And this is a lovely sentence. And Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see you again, and here God has let me see your children as well. That is, to me, an incredibly joyful and beautiful statement to say to a son that he had lost for so long. And then Joseph took the 2 of them, and he put Jacob's hands on them. Ephraim, with his right hand, he put on the left side of Jacob. And Manasseh, with his left hand, he put on the right side of Jacob and brought them close to him. But here's the thing. Jacob stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, though he was the youngest, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, though he was the firstborn. And Joseph tried to fix that, and Jacob said, nope. Sorry. I'm about to die, he says, way down in verse 21. But God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. And now I assign to you 1 portion more than your brothers, which I wrested from the Amorites with my sword. And he also says, I know, my son, I know. Ephraim shall become a people too, and he shall be great. Yes, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall be plentiful enough for the nation. So he blessed them that day, saying, by you shall Israel invoke blessing, saying, God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. And he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Very interesting little tidbits of information there. So we see that Jacob again is near his death. Joseph brings his sons to him, Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh again is the oldest, Ephraim is the younger. And Jacob purposely puts them in the spots of blessing. The right hand for the elder, the left side for the younger. But Jacob does something, and it's deliberate. He crosses those hands. This right hand goes to the younger. his left hand goes to the older. And it horrifies Joseph, but Jacob refuses to let Joseph fix that back. He says, I know what I'm doing. The younger is going to be greater than the older. And then he blesses them. He says, the God of Abraham and Isaac, the God who had shepherded him all his life, and the promises that God had given to him through Abraham and Isaac, your two boys are now going to grow into multitudes on the earth. Now, let's go back to those two tiny verses in Hebrews. Hebrews doesn't give you all of these details that Genesis chapter 48 does. It only says, by faith, Jacob, while he was dying, blessed Joseph's sons and leaned on his staff. So, Hebrews is telling you, again, Jacob is old, he's frail. He leans on his staff from his bed. He positions himself to get up to bless those two boys. And his last energy was spent, 1, worshiping God, and 2, blessing others. So his faith is not I'm looking back on my life and telling you all the great things that I did in my life. What he's saying is, no, the promises that were given to me from my fathers, I'm passing those on. Because those promises are going to outlive me. And they will carry on through those two boys. He blesses them as if Abraham is blessing them. So that life keeps rolling on and on after his funeral. And remember, he's still in Egypt. He never went back to Canaan. The family is very, very small. They haven't possessed the land yet. That won't come for centuries at least. So Jacob's laying his hands on these two grandsons is more speaking of the future, of God's future, and how it's going to be more solid than the situation is for the family right now in the present day. He's worshiping while he's leaning on that stick. He's blessing the next generation when his own physical strength has just left him. And he's trusting that God's covenant is much, much greater than his life and the time he had on earth. That's why Hebrews 11 takes this moment in Jacob's life to show you the kind of faith he had, and not the grander moments of his life, like when he wrestled an angel or when he had that dream of the ladder going up and down to heaven. The most significant ability for Jacob to show his faith to be recorded in the New Testament is that he blessed the sons of Joseph. Now, in chapter 49, Jacob also blesses the other sons that he has, the other 11. But this blessing is not a gather around the bed and tell your dad how much I loved you and how great you were and what you did for me. Jacob says, no. You need to gather around me because I have a few things to say to you. I need to tell you a few things before I go that are extremely important. So he starts to speak over each of his sons, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, Judah, Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, and it goes on and on and on until he gets to Joseph, which and gives the richest blessing to Joseph. But he's not commenting on these men's personalities here. He is giving some prophetic previews of the future of the nation of Israel. So, from the point of view of those two tiny verses in Hebrews, what's Jacob doing? He's dying, but he's speaking of what Israel will be, not what it is right now. Israel is only one man right now, Jacob. But he's telling his sons in chapter 49, which is a beautiful poem in and of itself. It's very long. I'm not going to read it right now, but please go and read it. He's giving prophetic visions of what the nation is going to look like in the future through each of these sons. He's saying, there's definitely going to be tribes. Each of you are going to have a tribe. Each of you are going to have a family unit. Each of you is going to have a space in the land to live. You will have a place. You'll have people. You'll have a place. And then Judah is going to bring out kings in the future. And there will be a long, long story for the nation of Israel that will unfold under the guidance and the hand of God. And remember, they're still in Egypt. They have not moved from Egypt. It'll be centuries before they even can get back to the land that God promised. But Joseph dies with his eyes on that future. He's facing forward at the end of his life, not looking back. And so this raises a question, I think, for us. Let's think about this question. When you think about your own future and your family's future, do you only see what you can control? Do you only see what you can measure right at the moment, what's happening for you right now? Or do you factor in what God has promised beyond your lifetime? Jacob's model is this strange thing. He knows he is ready to go, but he uses that last breath that he has to shape the future of his sons with blessings. Faith at the finish line is faith that is handed over for the next generation. Now, let's go and look at verse 22 in Hebrews and Joseph and what Joseph's asking for. Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave instructions about his burial. Jacob did that too. He told Joseph what he wanted done. But Joseph is serious about the instructions to take him back to the land. So let's find it. Here it is. Chapter 50 of Genesis. We'll start at 22. So Joseph and his father's household, that's all of his brothers, remained in Egypt, and Joseph lived 110 years. And listen to this. Joseph lived to see children of the third generation of Ephraim. So his grandson, great-grandson, and great-great-grandsons, he got to see these. The children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were likewise born upon Joseph's knees. So he raised his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and his great-great-grandchildren. At length, Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die. So he knows it's time. God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from this land to the land that he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel swear. So he tells his brothers, when God has taken notice of you, you shall carry up my bones from here. And Joseph died at the age of 110, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. So he was buried in the Egyptian style. now. Joseph also believes that God will keep his promises in the future. And it's going to be centuries later. He believes Israel is not going to stay in Egypt forever. Because he says, I know God's going to notice you. And when he does, you need to take my bones with you. And he refuses to let his life and his bones live in a pyramid in the deserts of Egypt. He says, that's not going to happen. And his request, I think, is also prophetic. He's saying, my life is not tied to Egypt and to my grandeur here. My life is tied to the promises of God. God's going to take my family, my brothers back to the land that he promised, and I want to go too. My final resting place is going to be the land of the covenant that God gave to my father. And he says and Hebrews says that's the faith of Joseph. Faith that says, God's going to take you. You'll get out of here. And when you do, don't leave me behind. I belong to the story. You need to take me with you. So giving instructions, Joseph says the only thing that makes sense for me to do with my bones is to go back to the land, because I know God's promises are real and they're true because he's lived it out in his life. He's seen God's work in his life, and he believes that God is going to do what he says he's going to do. So he's letting his burial, even his death, become a testimony to the future that God has planned for the land. So let's bring Jacob and Joseph together here at the end and tie these two into maybe a nice bow. I don't know. Maybe not. Hebrews 21 and 22 is basically showing you how people of faith die. Jacob dies by worship, and he's still worshiping. But he's blessing the next generation with all the strength that he has left. And Joseph, while he's dying, speaks to the future of God and how he's going to intervene in the life of Israel, and says, guys, don't leave me behind, because I want to be a part of that. But what do they have in common? They both die talking about God's future, not what he did for them, but what he's going to continue to do. They're not saying that God has only been faithful to me. They're saying God will be faithful to you and to my grandsons and my great-grandsons, generation after generation. And they both treat death like a doorway that's going to open, not that tomb, that brick wall where everything just stops. Their faith assumes that God's promises are going to flow right past their deathbed, and they're going to keep on going. They didn't stop. Death is real, folks. It's sad. It's sorrowful for the people left behind, but it's not the last word on the plans of God. When somebody passes, it doesn't end what God has planned for the rest of the world, for the future generations of the family, or the future generations of the people of God. And they both connect their personal story, their personal lives, to God's covenant and his continual promises to the nation. Jacob ties his sons and his grandsons to the promises that Abraham and Isaac were given by God. He says, I'm giving them to my grandsons. And Joseph ties even his bones to the future exodus of the Israelite nation. And I think they also point to Yeshua and some of the things about Yeshua's life. They're facing their deaths with trust in God. They're entrusting their spirits to the Father. And they're raising a new generation of the family of Israel. So, Beth, that's beautiful. It's a beautiful story. It's very uplifting, but tell me what this has to do with me right now. Well, first of all, I would tell you to let your faith face forward. Always look ahead. Don't look back. It's easy to talk about what God did 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Back when I was young, when I was first starting, when I did this, when I did that. And those stories are important. Don't get me wrong. Those stories are very important. They have shaped who you are at the present moment. But Jacob and Joseph here push us to say, here's what God will continue to do. Here's a future that I believe in and I believe is going to happen. Here's how I'm going to live it, how I'm going to plan it, how I'm going to bless it, and how I'm going to speak out the promises and the truths of God. And I'm going to keep saying what God is going to do for us. And that might look like praying for your children and your grandchildren, expecting that God's not done with your family, supporting a work of some sort that will not live, or you won't live, to see completed. And investing your time and money and words into things that are going to outlast you. Jacob and Joseph let their weakest point of life, their closest point to death, become a place of worship to God. Jacob worshiped while he was leaning on his staff, trying to hold it together to bless those two boys. And that's honest faith. You don't have to be strong. You don't have to feel strong. You don't have to pretend to be strong when you're not anymore. You may be leaning on medicine. You may be leaning on a walker. You may be leaning on a friend's arms or some type of group. But the important part is that even at your weakest moment, your heart leans on God. Faith at the finish is not going to look glamorous. Sometimes it looks like a very old man with very shaky hands, putting them on two boys' heads and whispering blessings to them. God, through Hebrews chapter 11, calls that faith. Joseph's bones preached a sermon in one verse here. My life isn't random. I didn't happen here on earth by just circumstance. He says he belongs to God, to the story of God and the story of God's people. And for us on this side of Yeshua's resurrection, that means, hey, recognize your story. Your story is part of the continuing story of the nation of Israel through Yeshua. And you are tied now to all those beautiful promises. Just like Jacob and just like Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh, the promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we are promised that hope in the resurrection when the Messiah comes back. So, when we hear Hebrews 11, verses 21 and 22, and think back to the fuller picture in Genesis chapter 48 through 50, here's the question. When my time comes, will my last words and my last plans point people to fear or to faith? Will people only think about my regrets and the failures that I had? Or will they understand that I had a vision passed to me that looked on the promises of God as everlasting? Jacob and Joseph show us that you can die in worship. You can die with blessing. And you can die looking forward, confident that God is going to continue to be faithful to those folks that you leave behind. So let's end here. I'll end with a little blessing for everyone. And thank you for watching. If you liked what I had to say, give me a comment. I love reading comments. Subscribe to the channel. Like our videos, etc., etc. But may the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob teach you to bless the next generation in faith. And may Yeshua, who rose from the grave, anchor you in a hope past your lifetime. And may the Spirit of God strengthen you to live and die with your eyes fixed on the promises.
קומי אורי, כי בא אורך, וכבוד אדוני עלייך זרח. קומי אורי, כי בא אורך, וכבוד אדוני עלייך זרח.